The cup was already in her hand before she decided whether she would use it. Chidinma stood at the entrance of the king's chamber, her fingers wrapped around the carved wooden goblet, the smell of palm wine mixing with something bitter underneath, something only she knew was there. The candle inside the room threw long shadows across the walls. She could hear him breathing. Slow. Steady. Unbothered. The way a man breathes when he believes the world is safe and his enemies are buried. She pushed the door open 1 inch. Just 1 inch. And then she heard his voice. He was not asleep. He was kneeling. His broad back was turned to her, his head bowed before a small clay shrine in the corner of the room, the kind men build when guilt has nowhere else to go. His voice was low, almost a whisper, but in the silence of the night it carried to her ears like a drumbeat. "Forgive me," he said. "For the Ebel. For what was done in my name. For Chief Okoro, a man I never should have called enemy. If his blood is on my hands, let me spend the rest of my life washing it clean." Chidinma's breath stopped in her chest. Chief Okoro. Her father. The cup began to tremble in her hand. 3 seasons earlier, the Ebel village burned for 4 days. Chidinma remembered every one of them. She remembered the sound the roof of her father's hall made when it collapsed, a long, exhausted groan, like a man who had fought too long and finally let go. She remembered running through the bush with her Aunt Ngozi, bare feet on hot earth, smoke swallowing the sky behind them. She remembered turning back once, just once, and seeing the Okon soldiers on the hill, their spears catching the light of the fire her father's home had become. She did not cry then. There was no time for crying when you were running for your life. She cried the night she found her father's body. He was lying at the entrance of the village square, his chief's robe still on him, his hands folded as though someone had laid him down with care. But his eyes were open, still looking at the sky he had watched over for 30 years. Chidinma knelt beside him in the dirt and took his hand and held it until it grew cold. Around her neck she placed his ring, the iron ring of the Ebel chief, and she made a promise to the darkness and to the stars and to whatever spirits still lingered in that ruined place. "I will not let this stand," she said. "I will not." It was Elder Nwosu who found her 3 weeks later, hiding in her aunt's hut 2 villages away. He was a small man with careful eyes, the kind of eyes that never look directly at what they are actually watching. He told her he was a senior council member in the Okon court, that he had opposed the war from the beginning, that King Emeka was a dangerous and reckless man who needed to be stopped before he destroyed more families. He told her the king was searching for a bride. He told her the matchmakers were looking in neutral villages. He told her that with the right name, the right story, and the right face, she could walk through the palace doors herself. "You will be closer to him than any soldier could ever get," Nwosu said quietly. "You will have access no army could purchase. 1 night. 1 cup. And the Ebel will have justice." Chidinma looked at him for a long time. "Tell me everything," she said. She arrived at the Okon palace as Adiz of the Nkwo village, a merchant's daughter, well-spoken, composed, carrying nothing that could connect her to the ruins of the Ebel clan. The matchmakers were pleased with her almost immediately. She was beautiful in the way that made people lower their guard. She was quiet in the way that made powerful men feel respected. And when she was finally brought before King Emeka himself in the Great Hall, she held his gaze without blinking, without smiling, without flinching, the way a woman who has buried her father in the dirt has learned to hold everything like stone. "You are not afraid of me," the king said, studying her. "Should I be?" she answered. He laughed. It was a real laugh, surprised and unguarded, and it filled the hall in a way she had not expected. She had prepared herself for arrogance. For cruelty. For the face of a man who burned villages without losing sleep. Instead, she found a man who looked tired in a way that power could not fix. She told herself it did not matter. She told herself she was simply doing what needed to be done. The wedding came quickly. The palace was alive with drums and color and the smell of roasted meat. Women sang in the courtyard. Children chased each other through the corridors. The ceremony was everything a marriage in a great kingdom should be. Chidinma wore white and gold and stood beside a king the whole world believed she had chosen, while beneath her ceremonial beads, her father's iron ring lay against her skin like a coal that would not cool. She smiled through every moment of it. She had learned to smile like that in the bush, while the smoke was still rising. Palace life was nothing like she had imagined it. She had imagined a court full of cruelty, of men who laughed about the wars they had won and the people they had broken. Instead, she found something quieter and more complicated. She found advisors who argued constantly. She found servants who spoke of the king with a warmth that confused her. She found a man who walked the palace corridors alone at midnight because, as one of the kitchen women told her without being asked, the king does not sleep well since the war. She watched him carefully. She watched him the way a hunter watches, the way her father had taught her to read people before she ever opened her mouth to speak. One evening, 3 weeks into the marriage, she found him sitting alone by the river behind the palace, his sandals off, his feet in the water, staring at the current like it owed him something. She almost turned back. Instead, something she could not explain made her sit beside him. "What do you see when you look at it?" she asked. He was quiet for a moment. "Everything that moves past you and never comes back," he said. "People. Choices. Years." He paused. "The Ebel village used to have a river just like this one. Did you know that?" Her stomach clenched. "No," she said carefully. "I used to think war was the price of peace," he said, his eyes still on the water. "Now I am not sure what it was the price of. I won that war and I have never once felt like a winner." He looked at her then, and his eyes were honest in a way that made her furious because she had not given him permission to be honest with her. "Is that a strange thing for a king to say?" "No," she said, and her voice was steadier than she felt. "It is a human thing to say." He nodded slowly and looked back at the river. And they sat there together in the silence, and Chidinma gripped her father's ring beneath her wrapper and reminded herself who she was and why she had come. She met with Mosu in secret twice that month. He came to the palace under the cover of routine council business and found ways to speak to her alone in corridors and gardens and passing moments that looked like nothing to anyone watching. "You are taking too long," he told her the second time, his voice sharp beneath its softness. "I am being careful," she said. "You are being sentimental," he replied. "Remember what he did to your people. Remember your father's face." She said nothing, but she carried his words back to her chamber and laid them over her thoughts like stones. He was right. She knew he was right. She had not come here to understand King Emeka. She had come here for justice. She was not his wife. She was the last daughter of the Ebel, and she had made a promise to the stars. She prepared the poison on a Thursday night. She had kept it hidden inside a hollowed section of her jewelry box, wrapped in dry leaves, small enough to vanish into a cup of palm wine without a trace. Nwosu had given it to her on the day they made their agreement, slow acting, he had said, undetectable, the kind that looked like a fever. She mixed it carefully. She poured the wine. She picked up the cup. And she walked to the king's chamber. But the door was open 1 inch and the king was on his knees and her father's name was in his mouth and Chidinma was standing in the dark hallway with a poison cup and legs that refused to move. Chief Okoro deserved better than what he received, the king said to the shrine, to whatever spirit he believed was listening. "I was told the Ebel attacked first. I was told there was no other choice. I believed the men I trusted and I moved too fast and people died for it. If I could undo it, I would. If there is a way to make it right, show me." She stood there for a long time after he stopped speaking. Long enough for the candle inside to burn lower. Long enough for the cup in her hand to feel like it weighed more than she could carry. Long enough for the question she had refused to ask herself since the day she arrived to finally force its way to the surface. What if he did not know? She turned and walked back to her chamber. She set the cup down on the table and sat on the edge of the bed and put her face in her hands and breathed. Her father's voice came to her then, not angry, not demanding, just clear the way he always was when he sat across from her in his hall and looked at her like she was the most important thing he had ever built. "Chidinma," he used to say, a woman who cannot ask questions is a woman who is always someone else's tool. Asterisk. She raised her head. She began to ask questions. It took her 6 days. 6 days of moving quietly through the palace, of asking careful questions to old scribes and archive keepers, of reading sealed council records she was not supposed to have access to, of following threads that went further back than the war itself. She told no one what she was looking for. She smiled at the right people. She asked about administrative matters that gave her reasons to request old documents. She was patient the way grief makes you patient, deeply, terribly, endlessly patient. What she found on the 6th day made her sit down on the floor of the records room and press her back against the wall and close her eyes. The war between the Okon kingdom and the Ebel clan had not started because of a border attack. It had not started because of stolen cattle or violated agreements or any of the reasons written in the official record. It had started because of a forged letter, written under the seal of the Ebel chief, threatening violence against Okon's eastern settlements, delivered to King Emeka by his most trusted senior council member 18 months before the first spear was thrown. The letter was a lie. And the man who wrote it, the man who forged the Ebel chief's seal, the man who handed it personally to the king and watched a war begin, was Elder Nwosu. There were records of payments. Records of messengers. Records of land agreements signed in Nwosu's name, quietly, months before the war ended, claiming Ebel territory as settlement for administrative service to the crown. He had not opposed the war. He had manufactured it. He had used the king's trust as a weapon and her father's death as a transaction, and then he had found the last surviving daughter of the man he destroyed and handed her a cup of poison and pointed her at the one person who might eventually uncover the truth. Chidinma pressed her hand flat against the cold floor. She was not an instrument of justice. She had been an instrument of Nwosu's survival. The anger that moved through her then was different from anything she had felt before. It was not the hot, screaming anger of the night her father died. It was cold and deep and clear, the kind of anger that does not shake, the kind that decides. She gathered the documents. She wrapped them carefully. She went back to her chamber and she sat up all night and she thought about her father and about justice and about what those two things actually required of her. By morning, she knew exactly what she was going to do. The king held court every Friday in the Great Hall, an open session where any member of the palace household could bring matters of concern before him and his council. Chidinma had attended 3 of them since arriving. She had always sat quietly to the side, watching, learning the rhythms of the room. On this Friday she did not sit to the side. She walked to the center of the hall while the session was open, while the council members were assembled, while Elder Nwosu sat in his carved chair to the left of the throne with his careful eyes and his quiet hands and his face that showed nothing. The hall went still when she stopped walking. The king looked at her with an expression that mixed surprise with the particular attention he had always given her, full, direct, genuinely present. "My king," she said, and her voice did not shake, "I have something to tell this court. All of it. And I ask that no one speak until I am finished." He studied her face for a moment. Whatever he saw there made him nod once. She began with the truth about herself. She told them her real name. She told them who her father was. She watched the color change in Nwosu's face as she spoke, not all at once, but slowly, like a man watching a wall come down brick by brick. She told the court about the approach in her aunt's hut, about the mission, about the poison that was still sitting in a cup in her chamber. She placed her father's iron ring on the floor in front of the throne and said, "I came here to use it." "I did not." Then she produced the documents. She laid them before the king one by one and she explained each one clearly and calmly: the forged letter, the land agreements, the payments, the timeline that placed Nwosu at the origin of a war that killed hundreds of people and erased an entire community from the earth. She spoke for a long time. No one interrupted her. The hall was so quiet she could hear the torches burning. When she finished, she stood straight and looked at the king and waited. Emeka did not speak immediately. He looked at the documents. He looked at Nwosu, whose face had gone the color of ash. He looked at Chidinma, at her father's ring on the floor, at her hands that were steady, at the woman who had come into his palace with a death sentence for him and had chosen, when the moment came, to put it down. "Seize him," the king said quietly. The guards moved before Nwosu could stand. He tried to speak, started a sentence about loyalty, about service, about misunderstandings, but the king raised one hand and the hall went silent again and Nwosu's words died in the air. the trial lasted 2 weeks. The evidence was not disputed, there was too much of it, too carefully preserved, too many threads that connected too cleanly. Elder Nwosu was stripped of his position, his land agreements voided, his properties returned to the crown. He was exiled from the Okon kingdom before the month was out, sent to live beyond the eastern border with nothing but what he could carry. He did not look at Chidinma when they let him out. She did not need him to. King Emeka came to her chamber on the night after the exile, alone, without ceremony. He sat across from her in the quiet room and looked at her for a long time before he spoke. "You came here to kill me," he said. "Yes," she said. There was no point in softening it. "And you didn't." "No." "Why?" She was quiet for a moment. "Because my father taught me that justice and revenge are not the same thing," she said. "I confused them for a while. The night I heard you praying, I remembered the difference." He looked at the floor. When he looked up again, his eyes were full of something she recognized, the same thing she had seen at the river that evening, the same weight that had been sitting on him since before she arrived. "I am sorry for what happened to your people," he said. "I am sorry for your father. I will spend the rest of my reign making it right." "I know," she said. And she meant it. The decree was signed on a Tuesday morning in front of the full council. It ordered the restoration of Ebel land, the rebuilding of the village, reparations for surviving families, and the formal recognition of the Ebel clan as a people under the protection of the Okon crown. Chidinma held the signed copy in her hands and read it 3 times. That evening she stood at the window of the palace and looked out at the horizon where the ruins of her childhood home lay, still visible in the fading light. The same window she had stood at on her wedding night, holding a blade in her heart if not her hand. She thought about her father, about his hands, his voice, the way he used to sit in the doorway of his hall and watch the sun go down over land that had belonged to his people for generations. She pressed her hand against the glass. She was not the girl who knelt in the dirt beside his body. She was not the woman who walked through a palace with poison in her hand. She was something she did not yet have a name for, something that existed on the other side of grief when grief has finally done everything it can do to you and you are still standing. She cried then. For the first time since the night she found him. She cried for a long time. And when she was done, she wiped her face, straightened her back, and watched the last of the light leave the sky over Ebel land, over her land that was finally, after everything, beginning to come home.